like to all welcome you to um, the second webinar for this term, um, Gender in Practice. Although we wouldn't want to say that this is strictly regarding gender, but we are in this webinar, we are attempting to shed a light in terms of the diversity of practice that is available in the Philippines. And two of our guests, one is of course part of our program, Isola Tong, and then Micaela Benedicto, a successful architect and visual artist, will be sharing with us their journeys and the uniqueness of their practice. So what I would just like to focus on is the relevance of this topic is actually post-pandemic, we will be expecting a shift in our practice. So the shift is already happening. The agility of smaller firms, firms with a more technical background, firms that are agile in 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 practice are the ones that are actually able to continue and prosper in these times of uncertainty. So why did I mention this? We have to be we have to be acknowledging the other facets of our practice that are existing. So we just don't limit our practice to building environments. Design and architecture encompasses a lot of creative practice. So in this webinar, we hope to spark that interest. Last time we opened up design and journalism, writing as part of an architectural practice is also something that we are advocating for. And in this afternoon, we would like to again introduce another facet of our practice, which is visual arts that can also be an extension of architecture. So we hope that with this webinar, set of webinars, we are more in tune and more aware of what are the possibilities around us, specifically after this in this post-pandemic environment. We do have to shift our belief systems in what should be architecture and what could be architecture. So we thank our guests for today for giving us time and their expertise to share with us how they have been surviving and they have been thriving in this environment. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Architect Harvey, for that opening remarks. Now, again, we have two guest speakers this afternoon, and I'd like to start it off already with our first speaker. She is an architect, artist, and musician living and working in Manila. Her ongoing work in visual art examines the ambiguities of space, memory, and loss, working with three-dimensional constructions and photograms to explore these relationships. She began exhibiting in group shows in 2010 and solo shows in 2013. She has been a practicing architect from 2004 to the present, setting up her company MB Architecture Studio in 2008. Her architecture work aims to achieve a distinctive sculptural and spatial quality by emphasizing the relationships between the unique user, the built space, and the environment. Her work has been published in Wallpaper Magazine, Blueprint, and L'Officiel, among others. Her ongoing work in visual art examines the ambiguities of space, memory, and loss. And she is currently working on a forthcoming exhibition in June 2021 at Silver Lens Galleries. Her work in music as part of Outer Hope has been published under Terno Recordings, Numberline Records, and Shelf Life Records from 2005 to 2018. A new music project will be released in 2021. Everybody, let us all welcome architect Micaela Benedicto.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me fine? Thanks so much for inviting me. I've been thinking a lot about how to frame this talk, and perhaps just walk you through my work and talk about some personal experiences. I just realized, by the way, that when I full screen my slideshow, I can't see the Zoom chat anymore. So just let me know if there's anything that I need to do with that. Anyway, just a personal background. So I'm Micaela Benedicto. I work as an architect, a visual artist, and a musician. Um, Perhaps the art and music came a little bit later. I was educated in UP, studying architecture, and the music and art, it's, I suppose these are like sort of childhood goals that I had that I eventually went back to, very naively thinking I can like do all of these at the same time, but also felt that it was important and have been working up to the present to sort of also create intersections within these. Um, Perhaps mostly that just happens organically. I think it's, more and more people have been doing these interdisciplinary practices, and it's quite inevitable that all of these things that you're working on, like the distinctions between them get blurred, and um, they do tend to overlap in terms of thought, in terms of your principles and whatnot. And I felt like this was an important talk to do, especially now, like very noticeably in the last 5 years. This is something that architect Isola and I have also talked about recently, that in the last 5 years, there's been sort of this jagged change and like a heightened awareness with, yeah, gender in this practice. And we were also talking about how lucky we are in this time that things are, I feel, becoming a little more progressive and inclusive. And not to say that there aren't any more struggles, because there still are, but I feel like there's been like huge leaps in development with that, and perhaps has heightened my own awareness as well with being a woman, practicing, having a solo practice, but also the queer community very much, as a lot of my peers, a lot of the people that I have in my personal and professional life belong to this community. So I feel like there's really been like a burgeoning sort of sisterhood, if that's the correct term, between women and the queer community. So with that, I suppose we can just continue with the Q&A later on. But I'd like to just like go through my work, and hopefully some of these thoughts come out in the things that I do. So I'm gonna start my slideshow right now. So I'll just go through my architecture work first and transition into showing my work for visual art. In the architecture work that I'm doing, I suppose there's a lot of emphasis on space. I mean, it's also an interest that I have in visual art. Um, for me, space is, it's, or using silence, for instance, is um, like a very important tool. Um, there's so many ways to work with it, and in terms of exploring the void, in terms of exploring how people perceive things. That's quite an emphasis that I have as well. And actually, with also with time and age, um, apart from gender, a very important issue for me at the moment. To be honest with you, I'm currently in my early 40s. I don't know how this happened, like just kind of snuck up on me. So I'm just gonna go through the works that I have. This is one of the architectural projects I suppose that I'm most proud of. Um, I call it the Z House, and in this project, there's a lot of exploration with in-between spaces and blurring the distinctions between outside and inside, thinking about how we could see architecture as that boundary, that line that delineates inside and outside. And there's a lot of like working with solids and spaces. In this house, the plan that you see right now has been, it's really like an arrangement of spaces that also has to do with negative space and dotting the plan with voids in order to see things differently or see things from all these varying perspectives, so that the entire structure, even though it still has some sort of kinetic arrangement happening around it. Um, this is like a very simple cartoonish diagram showing this sort of inverted Z shape that we have down here. And this results in a lot of like sustainable tools, like having like a good airflow and natural light within the house. This house actually, as it's failed to mention in a lot of publications, this house, the owners of this house is a queer couple, and their program perhaps varies from a lot of houses that we do. In some ways, it's also a lot similar. Um, but that's something actually that was quite it's quite interesting to note. For instance, like in publishing this space, there are questions about the owners, and in which I divulged all the information that I was allowed to say about them. They are a very openly gay couple. And in some publications, which, you know, I probably won't mention anymore, you know, these details have been deleted completely. Uh, uh, for which reasons I don't actually know. But I think that was quite a big factor also in doing this house and seeing how they live their lives and move around these spaces. So another diagram in 3 dimension of that formation, and a more detailed isometric showing the flow of these spaces. So in every project, there's also, I think, this thrust on authenticity, like in terms of building it and in terms of like just being transparent and honest about the methodology and the intentions behind it. And that's something that's very important to me and that I always fight for. Um, I don't necessarily like to cover things up as much as possible. Um, I'd like to show really the intended shape and the intended flow for these projects, and try to be as responsible as possible um, with how this appears to people, and how people perceive them, and especially the users, how they use these structures and how they use these spaces. So there's that ongoing sort of quest for authenticity here. There's also like the sensitivity to the environment, where things are more kind of tied together, as opposed to really just having a building in the midst of an environment. We always try to plug this into the design as if they were also rooms, or as if they were also contained volumes that work with the architecture. There is that sculptural quality that we strive for, but usually it's not for the sake of having these cool shapes. All of it really there's a reason behind it, and there's a reason, and there's an intention there that is also has to do with economy, to be honest, like with the times, and just not trying to be like very frivolous with how things are done for superficial reasons. Like most of the time, these are really just very much related to how things are built and how things are used, and how we maximize these materials. But the in-between spaces are very interesting to me, from when you go outside from the structure, because I think those are areas that are quite blurred, but it also makes it very flexible in terms of use. I'll go in more into that later. So in photographing this house, there were like so many angles that we could take, some that have also taken me by surprise as well. Another project wherein sort of perhaps a house that is not for everybody, just very like custom to the user. This is a house owned by a sound engineer who I've worked with on my music projects. I think there is an article about this wherein it's described as a nude building, wherein really there's nowhere to hide. It's an openness that I've taken with me with all forthcoming projects, with all current projects, that it's something I still strive for, to really try not to cover things up. This is just flashing briefly the plan of the project. 2 structures, one is a house and one is a recording studio. The light here enters through like very discrete slits. So we have, as you earlier saw, like a very bare facade, almost like a monolith on the site. And there are also other elements in it, such as these blocks that people find, a lot of clients find outdated in recent years, but I love using them, and I feel like this creates something inside that is a very interesting play of light, and you can see how this changes during the time of day, and I think that makes it kinetic as well, and just not stagnant. So that these openings appear in like some discrete portions of the house, mostly in the in-between spaces. And lastly, for the architecture work, this is a new project that I'm currently working on. Very challenging in terms of construction, but something I just really wanted to explore, wherein we substitute the usual post and lintel construction for a wall system, molded by these plywood forms, plywood, I'm sorry, molded by these wooden forms from recycled wooden pallets for shipping. This is something I would like to continue using, like using different materials to do the form or to do the mold. What this does is it eliminates our need to finish the house. The structure is already the finish. So this house actually is like a straight line that divides these two main views of the sea and of land. These are very crude photos just taken with my phone, but I would like to show you how it looks like in progress. So we have this very honest finish, showing how this house is actually built. There is a very long span here that was very structurally challenging. But the idea really there is for this house to be as transparent as we could. Basically, the entire house is a terrace, and the view of nature is framed with this very long rectilinear void. This is just another project showing like the in-between spaces. These steps, for instance, is where a lot of times the family talks to their kid and talks about their day. And on the other side of that living room, we have an angled ledge, which extends that space to the outside. And this is where friends gather a lot and catch up on their lives. So it's really just of a very simple angle that in some ways extend and transform the space inside. I'm gonna go now into the visual art. In visual art, I've been doing these things called photograms, which are photographs that are cameraless. So instead of film, you expose these 3D objects to light on top of a photosensitive surface. So in some ways, this is also about, this is still that three-dimensional work that perhaps only I see. In the end, like these are images that are presented, but they do come from architectural and three-dimensional work. These are some photograms that I showed maybe 5 years ago. In these frames, there's a photogram in the very back, and in front of them are these objects that mimic that image. So these are made of rods or acrylic cutouts or acrylic shapes that sort of mock the objects that are in the two-dimensional photogram in the back. So what happens is that each of these boxes are about the size of your head. And when you peer inside, there's a confusion that results there with regards to what is a recorded image and what is real, and just blurring increasingly blurring the distinctions between these, and having looking at a more complex image or structure. This is another series wherein a void is cut out of a piece of paper and positioned in different ways, sort of having this transformative progression, wherein that void becomes less and less recognizable as I manipulate the shape, and also with the way it's recording the handling of the paper, etc. I'm sorry, that's a cat in the room. Um, So these photograms have eventually progressed to having no objects at all. So in this series and the ones that you're about to see, the objects are actually non-existent. So it's about sort of forming something out of an absence, or forming something out of an event, wherein the photosensitive paper is folded into like these spatial forms that are temporary, then captured. And so when the paper is unfolded and developed into a picture, they also sort of become ruins of this temporary event. So you actually have an object that contains all these folds and cuts from something that happened in that space of developing and capturing this structure, this image. Perhaps this is a video of a sculpture that I do that also has a lot of play and perception involved, wherein it never really looks the same way depending on the vantage point of the viewer. And I think very important there is the agency that the viewer has over where they look and where they are. And that becomes a very important part of this work. This is another one blurring the distinctions between image and sculpture. They appear to be the same, but at an angle, you will see that one is convex and one is concave. So two almost identical images that happen to not be. This is a show that has just concluded in Silverlands Galleries. It just closed last week, and this is an exhibition called Volume, in which I investigate what this word means, and it mostly has to do with spaces that you can't, or matter that is contained, but that perhaps cannot readily be seen. And a lot of it also has to do with loss and the idea that time or age could be seen as a series of losses or a series of accumulated loss. In it, there are these sculptures that have transformative properties as well. Like the more repetitive the voids are, the more complex this becomes. And again, with the importance of the viewer changing their vantage point and having agency over their bodies and how they are placed in this space. Another example, I think the very interesting thing about this show was all these stories that I would get on Instagram with people taking pictures of them, because they're quite tricky to take pictures of because they're almost invisible. Like you see the spaces rearranged on them, and sometimes people would post pictures and tag me in it, and that angle never even occurred to me. So that was actually quite an interesting and accidental part of this project. For instance, this is something that somebody posted, and I didn't even know where this was initially, but I'm posting like their stories here because I thought they were so interesting, and it made me see the work in a new manner as well. This is actually a mirrored photogram. These were some of the trials that I had, showing how, one can possibly only speculate the form that this had taken, because it's laid out flat again, and it's an event that is probably unknown. And these are like the latest things that I've been doing, wherein these are the last of my slideshow, by the way, wherein I did this other process to the photographs. I used a silver toner, which alters the chemistry of the photograph. So after it's developed, it goes through another process wherein the silver particles, the silver halide in these photos come to the surface, and it actually turns it into a mirror. And what happens is that you see an image of yourself and your environment, but it looks as if it's still developing, almost like the mirror is asking for more time to process what's in front of it. And so what happens there is that you also see, I suppose this raises some questions about identity, because you see yourself as something that is formless or something that is still forming. So there is like this incomplete image of yourself that is not stagnant, but is still actually trying to find its shape, or that is still shape shifting. So this is an image of me just holding it in front and having parts of myself multiplied in there, or like just seeing myself as this kind of different being, or some kind of a being that I perhaps did not see in this manner before. And lastly, like a short video of it that I took, in which you can kind of see that shifting image, and along with it, the cuts and the folds, it becomes like a lot more just something that takes time to look at. Or time is involved in the act of looking. I think I may have gone over time now. Harvey, is it okay? Should we go to Isola and just go to the Q&A for any questions from the students?
Yeah, I think we'll take a 10-minute break first. Guys, if you have questions, let's if we can reserve that after the talk of Isola, so that we could have a consolidated question and answer, more of a conversation, I should say. I actually have a few questions ready, and if you guys have some, you can type it in our chat so that you won't lose the question, and then we'll just be tracking it, and then that could be the takeoff for our conversation. So thank you, Micaela.
Thanks
I
very
think
much.
we can have at least a 5-minute break, and then we'll proceed with our next presenter, Isola. So just a 5-minute break for us. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.
Okay, once again, good afternoon, everyone. For those who just joined us, this is the Gender and Practice Talk, of course, prepared by the Architecture Program with the help of SAGA. Now, a few minutes ago, we were able to see the presentation of architect Micaela Benedicto. And after this second talk, we have allotted time for your question and answer, for your questions. So please just feel free to put your questions in our chat box, and later on we will be reading them. Now, let me introduce our second speaker for this afternoon. She is a Filipino Chinese artist and architect currently practicing in Manila. She engages in the boundaries between nature and technology, human and non-human, center and margin, north and south epistemologies, challenging binarism, revealing worlds within worlds, conveying the interconnection of science, aesthetics, and politics through the lens of a trans Pinay from maritime Southeast Asia. Her work spans across a variety of media portraying a divergence from anthropocentrism towards interconnected biologies. She graduated cum laude at the University of Santo Tomas with a Bachelor of Science degree in architecture. She also studied and worked in Osaka, Japan for 4 years. She has shown and performed in Korea, Slovenia, Serbia, and the United Kingdom. She currently teaches architectural design theory and history at the De La Salle College of St. Benilde School of Design and the Arts of Manila. She is an incoming graduate student at University of California at Santa Cruz, California. So, everybody, let us all welcome architect Isola Tong.
Okay, so I guess yeah, thank you so much for the um, introduction. Yeah, it made me think about my life in Osaka, Japan, and it, how important it was, I guess, in sort of defining like my current direction. So, is it okay if I talk first about like, personal stuff and then yeah, because in Japan when I went there, I was expecting to learn more about architecture, but I ended up appreciating nature more, and I guess the environment. I mean, I was involved in the practice of the built environment, but then I guess their culture of there's this animism, there's this ancient religion called Shintoism in Japan. So if you go there, you'll see these shrines, and that sort of made me realize why their attitude towards nature and the environment is different because they did not forget that tradition from their ancient past, unlike us Filipinos whose animistic beliefs had been erased because of colonialism. So yeah, so with that in mind, I think I'm gonna share some quotes first from yeah. So I got the title Before the Gods, the Forest from a passage from Gaston Bachelard, who's a philosopher who deals with space and phenomenology. So he says, before the gods existed, the woods were sacred, and the gods came to dwell in these sacred woods. All they did was to add all too human characteristics to the great law of forest reverie. So it sort of makes you think about how human beings before saw their place in the universe and nature as as just one part of it, and then somehow I guess with the development of human consciousness, people became started believing in they became polytheistic, and then after that monotheistic, and then now it became humanist. So the human became the center of the universe in our era. So and that's causing a lot of ecological distress. And I think you may have already observed in the news, there's flooding everywhere. It's like the biblical deluge once again. So I think that kind of thinking caused these abnormalities in our climate. And then I also took a quote from So Fujimoto, whom I admire. I got this from his book that's just full of sketches and concepts. So he says here, when traced back to their origins, houses and cities must have been indistinguishable, just as how at one point houses and forests must have been indistinguishable. So in terms of architecture in spaces, I'm trying to explore this idea of looking back to a time when, maybe when the concept of private property did not exist, and nature and private dwelling was not really delineated from each other. And this was also inspired by a reading. It's actually anthropological. It's written by Stuart Schlegel. The title is Wisdom from a Forest. So he's actually a professor um, of anthropology in University of California, Santa Cruz, where I'm going to study. But he already died because he's like super old. So he wrote the book around the 40s. He went to the Philippines. Yeah, 50s, around early 50s. And he went to the Philippines and studied this tribe called the Teduray tribe. And then he saw like an alternative way of living, how, people there lived, were attuned to the cycles of nature. So they knew how to plant, their crops properly without exhausting the soil. And then they don't have a concept of a private property. So houses built in their village are sort of rented, but like, you don't have to give money. It's for the community. So like people just move in or move out. Nobody owns it. The entire community owns the houses there. So that one is a very interesting, I guess, thoughts on how to maybe move architecture forward from how it is being done right now. So I'm in line, I guess, with Son Fujimoto in terms of thinking of other possibilities of architecture. And yeah, so so um, I guess I just want to connect my I guess epiphany on like appreciating nature more, because of the Japanese animism to my own personal history. So my this is a, a photograph of my great grandmother in the island of Samar, where actually my student thought of where he's from as well. So she's a witch. So um, and then my childhood was peppered with really supernatural stories about her. It's very fascinating for me because it sort of gave me a window to alternative knowledge and indigenous knowledge that are kind of sidelined because our educational system is colonial. I don't know if you've noticed it, but like, since the beginning of like since elementary school, everything we learn is based on American pedagogy or education. So and right until college, like everything taught to us are Western, and then we're not even exploring our own sensibilities or our rootedness to this country, to the past, and we don't even look at that. So it's very unfortunate, I think. But so that's why at this point in my life, because my art and my life is not really that segment what's that, compartmentalized. It's sort of melds also. So so the concepts, I do take them from my personal history as well. So so because of those stories about her, it made me think of the forest and the mountains as a site of potential exploration or spatial exploration. So this is the hometown. As you can see, it's along the bay, and there are mountains behind. So I heard stories where when the Japanese started to attack Manila and then invaded the rest of the country, the people decided to go to the mountains. So it's very interesting how this image of the witch and the forest sort of, there's something about women and mountains and the forest, and then these invading sort of imperialists, or these empires trying to invade settlements that are living peacefully. So I find it a very rather interesting feminist symbol that are rooted in the local Filipino history and identity. So one interesting anecdote of that is this this guy called Papa Isio and the Babaylanes. It sounds like a band name, but it's actually Papa Isio is a Hiligaynon. He's from the island. He's also a Bisaya. So I'm also like half Bisaya. So um, Papa Isio is actually the inspiration for Don Papa Rum. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that brand. So that brand is inspired by Papa Isio, who is a Babaylan. So again, I guess to introduce what a babaylan is. Babaylan is a native indigenous Filipino identity, or that is actually female and queer. So I got this from an encyclopedia of trans studies written by Goldberg and Beeman. It's very new. It's from 2021 this year. So it says here the babaylan was associated with the babae or woman, yet because gender was understood as an occupation and a role not fixed on birth sex assigned male at birth, but female presenting people were allowed to perform priestessly duties and were considered women as they conduct themselves as such. A remarkable feature of this feminine status is that gender crossing is signified by the donning of women's clothes. So, the native Filipinos, that's why we call it kasarian in Tagalog. I don't know if you noticed that, but kasi when you say kasarian, it's more diverse, like sari-sari, there's a lot of like different roles or classifications where you can assume. So ancient Filipino societies were not binary or did not follow the Western construct or the Western consciousness. We had our own more inclusive consciousness where gender is seen as roles. So it doesn't matter what your assigned sex at birth is. Like as long as you feel like you want to do this duty or you feel like it's your destiny to become a priestess of the tribe, then go ahead. Yeah, nobody's stopping you. Nobody's gonna discriminate you for your choices. So this is Papa Isho and Ordonizo Magbuelas. The picture here is actually in Manila. He was arrested by the Philippine Constabulary, which was the PNP during the American era. So his story is interesting because around the late 19th century, when Filipinos were starting to revolt, there was a revolution in this island, in the island of Negros. So Papa Isho, his dad, was killed by the Spanish because of he was accused of treason. So he was so angry, he decided to go to the mountains to he gathered peasants, and other Filipinos to the mountains, and where they met the babaylan, or these ancient Filipino priests and priestesses who decided to live in seclusion in these mountains because in the lowlands, so you can see the island of Negros here. So there are two mountains in the middle, and then the rest are lowlands. So the lowlands are obviously settled in by Spanish forces or the Spanish Empire. So the lowland people were obviously very oppressive. These hacienderos. So he sought refuge in the mountain once again, the image of the witch in the forest, and then met these babaylanes. So it's very interesting how marginalized people or people who are not, or people who are the subjects of violence by the state or an invading force usually seek refuge in spaces such as the mountains. So I actually read this theory that because I was researching on the culture of Highlanders in Luzon, the Ifugaos. There's a theory that they may not be originally Highlanders. They were actually from the lowland, but they were displaced by new arrivals by Filipinos who newly arrived Filipinos in the ancient past. Maybe the modern Kapampangans, or who displaced them, so they decided to move there and then decided to plant rice on along these really rugged geography. So yes, so my artistic practice is very playful. I guess because I'm already queer, so what the hell, I might as well play around, my identity, since uh, as what was said earlier by anthropologists regarding the babaylan. Ancient Filipinos don't see gender as something essentialist or something you are born with, but it's something you assume out of your own agency. So it's not something, because the birth certificate says, oh, it's because you defined it for yourself. So in line with that, I'm also exploring drag. It's a way to express subjectivities. So yeah, I shared a quote here in the same what's this encyclopedia of trans studies by Jaya Jacobo. She's a writer and an educator in Ateneo right now, and she's also a trans Pinay. So I'm exploring right now the identity politics of trans Pinay, which is where we're trying to normalize it as an identity because it's more specific. Because when you say trans woman or trans man, it's more aligned to the experience of the Western white or maybe non-white but Western people. So trans Pinay is more sort of local um, way to express gender. So this is you know these I was inspired by, I guess, I saw these suit kasi, this ghillie suit or ghillie suit, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it's usually used for hunting. So when you were in the forest and then you want to camouflage yourself from so animals and animals won't detect you. But then it's a very masculinized activity. But then I try to subvert it and use it as wig or like as sort of a dress. And then I wore crazy makeup and also inspired by tribal imagery. So yeah, this was shown in a group show called I forgot the English title. I just remember the Korean. What was that? Anyway, my piece it was shown in Seoul, and this was printed there. It's called Otherly Human, which is inspired by this eco-feminist reading that is encountered in 2020. So yeah, so where am I? So Arroceros, this is a site of my research recently, which is actually also a site of research I thought. I don't know how it happened in our design sub course. It was just a coincidence. But anyway, I was fascinated by this space, this, I guess, a non-architectural spatiality. Because, if you look at the image of Metro Manila, it's just suffocating, suffocated and stifling urban configuration. And it's really strange, I guess, queer, I guess. It's stemming from the concept of queer ecology. So it's very queer to see a lush vegetation in such urban space. So, and it echoes what the architect and theorist Beatriz Colomina wrote about creating these in between spaces that are subverting masculinized space, because she's a feminist architect. So she's exploring the ideas of how cities and architecture are very gendered and specifically catered to the masculine, and then it doesn't really account for other identities. So it's very interesting for me how the forest also sort of echoes that idea, because it's very strange. Well, again, there's a short history of this site. It used to be a Chinese settlement of merchants, and that's why it's called arroceros, from the Spanish arroz, which means rice. So it's a place where people trade rice for maybe imported Chinese goods like silk or porcelain. So it's and well, if you I don't know if you're familiar with Manila, right across Pasig River is the Binondo. So before Binondo, Arroceros was one of the sites of Chinese merchants. But then they were killed by Spanish forces because they were again accused of sedition. Um, So there's a lot of violence that happened in this site. And then in the 19th century, it was a site for the Compañía General de Tabacos de Filipinas, which were still owned by the Lopezes of Barcelona, which is different from the Lopezes here in the Philippines. Interestingly, I was talking to a curator in Barcelona. We were just having random conversation, and then she mentioned to me that the Lopez she knew of the Lopezes. She knows the Lopezes in Barcelona, and there's an issue going on about because in Spain, I'm telling you this, in Spain, they are denying the violence that they've caused during the Spanish colonial era. They're not. I have a Spanish friend, and I told him, like, what do you Spanish people think about your colonization of the Philippines? And he's like, whatever, I don't know. It's not being taught in my in school. So they're kind of like denialist. So it's kind of toxic to talk about. They really don't talk about us. Like they're ignorant of the Philippines. So that curator was so fascinated by my stories because she doesn't know, like, even as a Spanish person or who lives in Barcelona, she is so ignorant of what Spain did during the colonial 300 years of enslavement of the Filipinos. So interestingly, one point why I'm interested in this site is because it was actually a project by all women organization called the Winner Foundation, which is headed by Chiki Sikia, who's the the famous Sikia apartments where artists lives. And the story behind is the the first lady of the wife of Fidel Ramos, who was the president in the early 90s. She's an environmentalist, so she wanted to plant trees along EDSA, along streets, to line the streets of Manila with trees. But what happened was, some, random people stole the saplings of the trees. So parang she was debating, like, so what shall we do? Where shall we put all these seeds or like saplings? So they decided to develop an empty lot to plant all these trees. So it was a 15-year development plan because they have this study that it takes 15 years for a forest to have a reasonable ecology to be stable and 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 allow people to actually visit it. So, and then apart from the forest being built by women, it faced again a lot of threats from men in office. Ironically, LGUs who are sworn to protect you know you know parks and the commons, the spaces that are not private, the spaces that are democratic, the spaces that we could all share. So even that are you know being sequestered. So in different points in the early 2000s and 20 and then late 2010s, there were threats to these forests to be demolished for random projects like gymnasiums, um, facilities. So you know how it is here. So so yeah, so my practice is basically interested in, again, the blurring of the architecture, culture, and nature. So I'm trying to explore that idea that maybe there's not really, even nature itself could be man-made, if you get what I'm trying to say. Like because again, the binary system inculcated in her head, male, female, this and that, bad, good, is kind of not true. And even nature, our conception of the difference the, between culture, technology, and nature is also kind of strange. It's a very Western colonial way of thinking. Because if you think about it, a lot of forests in the Philippines, and as well as in, there's a story in Native Americans in the U.S. A lot of the forests there were planted by them because they don't do agriculture how we do it, which is based on you know the industrial agricultural practice of the West. It's they're planting inside the forest, so they don't kill the 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 soil, and then they only plant what's ecologically reasonable to the forest. So where am I? So it's more. So my point is, nature, culture, technology are not separate from each other, but they're part of they're part of the system of a complex web of networks. And I guess one point to portray that fact is even this very Zoom meeting, this presentation I'm doing, the the CAD drawings that made buildings possible are powered by what? It's powered by electricity from fossil fuels from organic bodies. So even technologies that we think are not natural still extracts from biology. So, it sort of makes it the line blurry. So this is I guess an exploration of that idea, because I noticed that the venation of plants or leaves that I found in Araceros are sort of echoes how um, urban configurations you know, are shaped. It's very interesting because, again, if you look at the venations of these plants or plant material, and then if you look at the plan of Manila, they sort of look similar. It makes you think, what if human beings, we think from our perspective, from our very narrow viewpoint, we think that architecture, urban planning, intramuros, which is right here, are man-made. But then if you see things from a different scale, it begins to show how similar it is to biological agencies that are different from us, like nature. So parang it's a very interesting, I guess, parang no matter what we do as human beings, we're still part of nature. Are you getting my drift? It's we're still agents of nature. Kasi in the end, we still follow certain patterns and behavior that follows a sort of natural I guess patterns or cycle. So in my translation of these exploration are cellular cartographies, wherein I sort of create a hybridized drawing of biological configurations and man-made urbanity. And then I also took photos of, I call these micrographies, and these are photographs of leaves from a microscope that I found in Araceros Forest Park. This is I only have limited editions of this. I think I only printed 10 set of 9, and Mick actually got one. So thank you, Mick, because I was actually doing a fundraising for my move to the States because it's so expensive. So yeah, and then this is another iteration of the idea. It's very interesting if you look at nature, at really, if you look at trees from a human lens, a normal human eye, it doesn't, whatever, it's organic. But then if you really look at it from a deep, a different lens, it starts to show interesting geometries that could be architectural. So again, it blurs that distinction between human architecture and natural architecture, or biological materials and, say, urban planning, for example. So where am I? So this is another iteration of that, and it's in painting form. So again, I took satellite imageries from different parts of Manila and then translated it in an organic sort of language. And then it's a what did I call this? An organic sculpture, a live sculpture, a biosculpture. So it's made of real plants, and it's shaped. It's intended to shape like a dildo or a tower or a building, because that sort of tendency for human beings to create tall towers for me represents that capitalistic drive of like that is very masculine in nature. It's very penetrative, it's very monumental, it's very shouting. It's trying to prove a lot. It's trying to show power. So and me being a trans sort of I wanted to create a sculpture that sort of expresses how I subvert or feminize this sort of biology. So I try to put flowers there and organic materials that are not usually associated with um, human, human materials and structures. So this is screenshots of videos. I think Sir Harvey, you remember this because there were two Serbian phenomenologists slash artists slash architects who came to Benilde and taught us, a phenomenological exploration of space using the body, or the corporeal articulations of space. So here, instead of what we did was during the workshop was to explore. We created these sort of weird choreographies to explore abandoned spaces in around the campus near Taft Avenue in Pablo Campo. But like here, I instead explore the spatiality of the forest because, again, it blurs the line because again the forest is not technically nature made. It's still planted. It's still you know women planned it. It's not as if it's been there since the Jurassic era. There's still human intervention in it, despite looking like it's not. It's still architecture. So I'm trying to sort of subvert that idea of architecture as being just how we view it, having the typical stat the yeah those the elements were used to. So maybe a forest is also architecture. If you think about how human beings theoretically evolved in the forest, it is said that we are from the forest. Human beings evolved from forests in Africa. So in a way, maybe forests were the first architecture um, for human beings, and then it's kind of sad that we have this schizophrenia of like separating strictly, technology and nature, that we forget that we came from nature. And then and then that's how we get our attitude or how we treat nature right now. We just see nature as something you extract from or something to be abused. We become that, and then it's creating a lot of problems in the present. um you know because we forgot where we came from. So so I wrote here transfeminine bodies, affective spaces, and phenomenology and transgender subjects. So it's like exploring the forest as a queer person, using my body to. So this is a sort of performance slash recorded, documented on video, which I will actually show and sell because I need money for my education in the States, and sell in Barcelona. So luckily, the same curator I was talking about earlier included me in this art fair in Barcelona. So um, wish me luck, wish me luck so that I will have allowance. So this is my my most recent show, which is in fact the same costume that I used uh, in this video and performance, and created a sort of installation. So this is curated by Carlos Gijon. It's the errant life and promiscuous form. So it talks about biologies and life and how it relates to form. So, because while I was exploring the forest, a lot of these detritus from dead leaves, seed pods from the fire tree, sort of attached to me because this costume is actually very sticky. There's a lot of like threads. So, and I thought like it's already an interesting I guess piece in itself. It's sort of bringing to the gallery, I guess, formal or I guess um, a more materialized form of that experience that I had in my exploration of the forest. And yeah, and that exploration is also inspired by this concept, a very interesting concept by two lesbian couples who will be my professors in California, which I'm very happy about because I'm a fan. Their names are Elizabeth Stephens and Annie Sprinkle. They created this manifesto called Earth as Lover. So they instead of seeing Earth as a mother, where you just because when you say mother, you can just become a brat and and then just ask anything from your mom, and your mom will not complain because your mom is your mom, obviously. But if you think about Earth as a lover, there's this sort of boundary and there's this reciprocity and respect. So I lifted this quote from that manifesto. So we make love with the earth. Even while in quarantine, we make love to the earth. Through our senses, we are aquaphiles, terraphiles, aerophiles, and aerophiles. We acknowledge that around half of our bodies are made up of the non-human, are made up of microscopic collaborators such as fungi, bacteria, viruses, and archaea. We hug trees, shamelessly massage the earth with our feet, and talk erotically to plants. We are skinny dippers, sun worshippers, and stargazers. We caress rocks, are pleasured by waterfalls, and admire the Earth's curves often. We listen to scientists of all colors and creeds. With the Earth as our lover, we are never quarantined alone. So this is the ecosexual manifesto, and very interesting. So and then they actually have these non-religious, non-sectarian weddings, which they do in forest. So they have these like really, and they usually marry queer people, non-binary people in the states. So very interesting people. So I think that's about it. Sorry, I'm not able to share all my work, but I guess these are my current new things. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Architect Isola. And now, that was a very interesting talk, by the way. I learned
Thank you.
so much from the two of you. So I'm sure Architect Harvey has a lot of questions also,
Yeah.
and we'd like to ask our participants if you have any questions, please just type it in the chat box, and we will be so glad to answer and accommodate your
Yeah.
questions.
I just want to say a few things before we open the questions. Um, this is what inclusivity is all about, and we saw it in the two talks. Inclusivity opens up different voices,
Mhm.
and opens up different points of view, and I think this is the Benildian ethos of inclusivity, wherein photographers and architects don't have a particular face in terms of what you expect them to be. And I'm not sure if everyone would appreciate this, but when we were studying, our only reference for architects are actually white male, Western architects, and this is a great direction and a great um, development in our practice to have diverse voices in our practice. And I'm really happy for this talk. And I hope a lot of us have also um, catch inspiration from the two speakers right now. And we are always pushing for change, pushing for a better understanding of different voices. And I'm just so happy, and I wanted to express that kind of impression that architects could come in different forms and different identities and different point of views. So let's open up the questions for our guests for today. I do have a few, pero I'll ask the floor muna if they have questions.
Yeah, you guys can just type it up or raise your hand and turn on your audio. You can just fire away your questions. Maybe
Si-
Architect Harvey, while we're
yeah.
waiting for them, maybe
Sige,
they're
since
warming up. You can start it.
I just have a question for Micaela. Um, the architecture is quite strong, I would say, and I'm wondering, since you started 2004, when did you feel like you have already this confidence? I don't want to say a style, because style is too limiting, but in terms of you have this confidence about your identity as an architect, when did this happen, or was this present from when you started? Kasi the architecture actually
No,
reflects
actually.
also in your visual arts, di ba?
Yeah, I think, well, I quit my jobs in 2004, but I suppose, to be very honest with you, didn't have a lot of jobs of my own when I was beginning. You know, it's like you just kind of take what you can. And I think in 2006, I was very lucky to get this job from Fully Booked, the bookstore, wherein they were actually looking for like an in-house architect. And at the time, I was already trying to have some kind of career in music. And I told them that I didn't want to work for them. I told them that like I didn't want to be employed there. So you kind of negotiated. I think that's something very important in my life as well. There was like this negotiation to sort of get out of the corporate world and
Mhm.
just kind of operate as an artist. And so the owner was, I was very lucky that he agreed to this, that I said like, I can just consult for you and not have to like be stuck in your office. And so that was actually one of my first projects, a very commercial project. But yeah, I took it out of need also. Um, but I think that's where I first, I guess, got some kind of inkling that maybe I could be good at it, or have a style. Um, and yeah, so I suppose that's where I got some confidence, like because it was received well at the time. And after that actually was quite another struggle, and it took me like this kind of unbelievable, but maybe it took me maybe 8 more years, like after that was built, to get recognized for something else. So very long, frustrating 8 years until I got to do a house wherein I felt like nothing was really compromised. Because before that, I was doing houses with that maybe were renovations or some kind of collaboration with the owner, where I feel like the idea was not very clearly executed. And at some point, I just kind of went, after doing all these projects, all I have at the end of it, yeah, especially when I was beginning, like didn't really like earn tons of money from this, right? So all I really have at the end are photographs. And so at some point, I really wanted to make it count and really just kind of asserted myself in doing what I believed was best for them too, honestly. And so, yeah, I guess to answer your question, it took like a very long time to find, um, this
Find your
this
footing.
style or this
Yeah.
methodology. Yeah.
Because I understand that there's this validation of being an architect. You can't be called an architect if you haven't built anything, and they don't know actually the struggle of realizing a project that you work from ground up, and that you feel it's a synthesis of what you have, what your thoughts are in architecture, and it's not just for female architects, but also for young architects, that came out of the academe, and there's this struggle nga for validation, and I feel like it's a long time coming, but
Was a long time coming, but ironically also, I mean, this is something that, like when young architects, I mean, I've only had a few apprentices, or people that work with me. I only have like four younger architects who have ever worked with me, and it's something they always ask me about. And I keep telling them that it's really strange, but the decisions that I've made in doing other things like pursuing my childhood interests, or in music, or like kind of sort of landing in the visual art field, and um, they seemed like diversions in the beginning. And I remember a lot of well-meaning friends telling me that you can't ever be good at something if you keep trying out all these different things. But it wasn't, I guess it wasn't my goal kasi to be like the very best at parang that's just so boring, right? Like all I really cared about was to, yeah, to just to do the stuff that I wanted. But yeah, I feel like these also worked out because it's kind of nice to get inspiration, like with the Isola stock, for instance, to get inspiration from other readings, and not just like like just fill your head up with architecture readings. It's just so nice to get inspired by things that you're genuinely interested in. And this will really shift your perspective as well, and kind of get you out of that box wherein everything is about building, or everything is about like architecture theory. I think that these can all be connected in many ways. And you really just kind of shape your path, right? Like depending on what's important to you. So there.
yeah, I'm actually interested in seeing your earlier works because we all know young architects love to have a lot of ornaments in their buildings, and yours is like really stripped down and honest in terms of form, in terms of the material. And it takes a lot of guts, especially here in the Philippines, because they
Mhm.
expect a lot of things. I am realizing that we are a maximalist in nature, and here comes your buildings that are really confident, and really doesn't care about what people think in terms of the pure definition of architecture. So I'm wondering, did you arrive at this point of view, or did you arrive at this thinking when you started, or was this really a culmination of your practice?
I think this is just how I really am. I mean, to be honest, like okay, like the well, because this is a gender talk, I wanted to like share more personal experiences a while ago, but obviously we're pressed for time. But like the women in my family are actually huge influences to me. like my mother, I think, was like quite different from like other moms. She's not she's not weird or anything, but I don't know. This is like a kind of strange background, but my grandmother was widowed at a very young age. So my grandparents were yeah, they met in a hospital. You know, my grandfather's a doctor, my grandmother is a nurse. And yeah, unfortunately my grandfather died very, very young, like at 28 years old. And my grandmother became like a single mom in the 50s, if you could imagine that, working as a nurse, you know, not earning a lot of money. And he left her with two young daughters. Like, my mother was practically a baby. She was a baby, not even practically. Um, but this, like, family history, I think, is, I guess, a little unusual. It's a family with just women, you know, working mom, single mom, with two young daughters that she worked very hard for to put through private school even. And um, this is just something that I can speculate with how my mother grew up, you know, in a family with no no male role model. Her style is like very influential to me. Um, you know, my mom's quite simple. She doesn't work as an artist or, you know, but she was a stay-at-home mom. And my earliest education came from her. I feel like a lot of who I am is due to her upbringing. And it's almost like everything she liked, I also liked. I don't know why. Like, I didn't even try to fight it. This is just like, oh, this is really nice. But oh my god, it's really nice. You know, like it's kind of been passed on to me. And my mother's aesthetic is, yeah, just going with into my friends' houses, seeing how their moms are. She was like very, very different. And even in this house that they worked, you know, my parents worked so hard to make us a house, you know, like they were self-made people. And the house that we had in this neighborhood was a little strange also. It was quite small, smaller than others, and quite minimal. I mean, even without them knowing that word. For that time, it was the 80s, by the way. Super maximalist. And we lived in
Yeah.
this house that it couldn't have been simpler, really. Like, we grew up thinking that this house was not as interesting as other people's houses, but looking back, it actually was. And I keep that in mind when doing, you know, buildings now, houses where the family has like some one or two young children, and think about how this is going to affect their lives or shape their tastes. And I think our house did. It was just very, very straightforward, actually. But there's like some unusual things in it, kind of funny things in it. Like, the kitchen is something I super remember. It it was open and it had like weirdly, the cupboards are curved. It's like a curved line, just one. And I don't know, there were like these kind of push button things, like some of the lights, just the lamps, parang you kind of touch it, it turns on. Just neat things like that. And everything's just like black and white. And because it's the 80s, like there's some gold in it as well. um, yeah, but I think that's sort of shaped me. And she always says like, "Oh, you don't need that. You don't need that." A lot of this has to do with being from a family that struggled as well, and really just have you know, like as a kid, I would go to a department store and point at things that I wanted, and
Mhm.
my mom says like, "You don't need that," or like, you know, that doesn't look great. There's so many things on it, you know, and I think that's sort of, yeah, inevitably like bled into my brain that, you know, the simplest things are possibly sometimes harder to achieve, but also the most clear, like the most if you want to get an idea across, um this is how you do it. I think, you know, just try not to like cover it up in, I don't know, part of the word, like some bullshit, right?
Yeah,
Like everything is
Right.
just sort of
that's
nice
actually
and clear.
interesting in terms of the connection between your practice in Isola in using personal history as a
Mhm.
takeoff from the practice, and then when we saw the presentation of Isola in terms of the crux of her practice is taken off from her personal history, the personal histories of her family. So it's like both of you were using that as a fulcrum, but in with different interpretations. So I
Right.
wanna also
Eh,
like I wanna
Sir
also like
Harvey, actually, we have
yeah.
a question
Oh,
here
yeah, okay.
from our students. Yeah, it's in relation to you pointing out that, students now don't really use, well, we use ornaments and a lot of, those details. And with the design of architect Micaela, which is very, straightforward and very gutsy in terms of, those blank, clean spaces. And one of the students were asking, for architect Micaela, in context to how you prefer to leave your exterior designs bare, how do you feel about certain materials that us students could use for facades, such as metals that oxidize over time?
Yeah, I would love to use metals that oxidize over time. Actually, I mean, I don't think naman everything is like okay, like just to be clear, I don't think every thing you use is for purposes of function. Like
Mhm.
that gets a little boring too, right? It's like anyone can design a functional building. I think if you have an idea that is there for non-functional purposes, but you know, for perceptive or sensory purposes, like there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, you know. I mean, it's really just comes down to decisions you make as a designer, in which, you know, you have certain values as well, and certain urges, you know,
Mhm.
like that's definitely something interesting as well, where you, I think a big part of sustainability is really just not necessarily using like the cheapest materials, but the most economical as well, with regards to how it lasts, like you know, or like how it changes over time. So yeah, I hope that answers
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
He's very happy. He's kind of shy to ask the question. And then we have another question here for Architect Isola. What advice can you give us students who strive to step into a larger ring for competitive designers? Like, how can we as Filipinos present ourselves as more than the stereotypes that West have for us?
Right. So this is a very interesting question because I think it's also a time of reckoning. This entire, this era,
Mm-hmm.
this current era
Yeah.
is a reckoning era, I think. So I think it's a perfect time for us to again look at ourselves, look at our, at our environment, our history, and take it from there instead of just you know, getting um, so what happens, what I notice is usually you see these images of architecture built here that are kind of, oh, parang ano siya, parang Jean Nouvel. You know, like I guess Mick could understand this, like especially
Yeah.
when we're studying in our, you know, respective universities, like people tend to just like copy from the West or whatever's like trending there. So I think there's not, I'm not trying to be a purist. I think, you know, why not? But also, we need to also maybe see like what around us here in the Philippines or as Filipinos could inspire us and take it from there. Because recently, actually, even in the West, they well, so I could say it from a visual arts perspective. They really value now like the specificity of Southeast Asian experiences. Like they don't really care na about like if your artist or your practice is, you know, following this certain theory or Busian, or they don't care about because they know it because they're the
Right. They
West.
already have it.
So
Mm-hmm.
you know why do we care about your take on Le Corbusier, who is Swiss? We want to know what we don't know from you as a Filipino. Like what is your experience? What is a Filipino experience? Like no matter how difficult it is actually to define because of our colonial
Mm-hmm.
history, I think there's still something unique to us that's like not replicable in Europe or the States. So there's value in being a Filipino, and I keep on telling this in different talks. I think we only lack confidence. We already have
Right.
everything, the resources to be. We're actually good. You know, we're actually
Yeah.
amazing. And then I guess it's just colonial mentality that's stopping us from, you know, really being more confident and say, you know, this is and assert like what Mick said, like assertion, like really need to assert ourselves more. And I think it's a good time to do it because the West is creating spaces for us. They've begun to create spaces for us. I guess it's also because of the BLM, you know, all these social movements abroad that
Mm-hmm.
sort of
Mm-hmm.
forced them to to do a reckoning of their own colonialism. So I think it's perfect. It's a good chance, right? We go to explore our Filipino-ness, whatever that means, and it's debatable. Like,
Right. It's the
yeah,
confidence of showcasing really what Filipino and who Filipinos are, right? And we have a comment here and a question from our very own architect Andro Amagat also. He said very insightful presentation. This question goes to both of you. How do you channel your architectural sensibilities into your exploration of different mediums and disciplines? Anybody can go. Whoever wants to take this question.
Mm, how do I'm thinking about it as I think that you know okay, like for me, because I got into doing visual art quite late, and by that time I was already really working as an architect. And I think that architecture, I think it changed me, like whether I liked it or not. Um, like going into it, diba, you pick your course when you're in high school. I had no idea what I was getting into. Like all I knew was that I wanted to do something creative, um, and also something that had some science in it because I was really into that as well, like math and all that. And so this seemed like a sensible choice, but I really didn't realize that this would be like a great thing to study, no matter what you end up doing. Like I feel like this, I don't know, but it's all about. I feel like this balanced me in many ways because I was very just kind of like sort of like daydreaming
yeah,
child, like not very present, I suppose, or parang
yeah,
it wasn't natural for me to be like very precise with things, or it it kind of I think made like a good balance, but also like Yeah, it was already inevitable, like going into the other disciplines, that it was already part of me. Um, yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't even have to consciously channel it, right? Like it just comes
Mhm.
out.
Naturally. Yeah, yeah. What about for you, Isola?
Yeah, I think yeah, the balancing thing is very interesting because I think what happened to me, I guess we all we're sort of lost children and like I don't know what to
Right.
do with my life because
Right.
we are so young. Like we don't know. I just knew that like we're the same. I also like science, math. Yeah, not so much, but I'm okay with it. But yeah, and then I guess there's also that layer where I it's hard for me to justify a fine arts course because I'm coming from a Chinese Filipino Chinese family, so you know in arts, people don't. Yeah, I mean, I'm not from a creative family, so they don't understand that money could be created from the arts.
Same,
So
same.
yeah, so architecture became a sort of compromise. So to my my desire to explore my creativity and at the same time please other people. So, but then I guess it helped eventually because I realized that there's a lot of explorations in art that are actually spatial. You can like what
Yeah,
I did. You
exactly.
can do performance that involves space, and it really helps if you have a more develop spatial consciousness, if that's a thing. You think in 3 dimensions, so you don't see things in a very flat sort of way, and it really works. And if you think about it, there's a lot of conceptual artists in the West that were architects. You know,
Mhm.
they were actually or using the architectural language, and it helped me because well, right now I have an upcoming exhibit in UP Vargas, and then it's an installation, but like a really big one. I'm making a room because I was inspired. It's actually very funny and campy because that's my take. But the structure itself is very dark. It's black, but then it's a cave
Mhm.
because I was inspired by this Filipino film by Romero, Eddie Romero, in the 70s, because there was a time in the 70s where Americans shot campy horror sci-fi films in the Philippines because it was cheaper. And then the story was there's this underground laboratory where they experimented on animals and human beings. So there are these hybrid sort of lion women. It's really fun. It's really weird and funny. So yeah, I sort of recreated that the speciality of the cave, and that weird experience of again, it's connected to ecology and biology again. Human intervention with biology, but then in creating a cage basically, because in the movie they kept these hybrids in the cage. So it's kind of funny also, but like the execution is actually it looks serious. So there's
Mhm.
surprises inside. You will see me in, in a costume. So but sorry, I know Mick naman knows my humor. So there's like me in drag and like in you know s- skimpy outfit. So parang ano siya, because I like these things. Yung
When is
parang
this going to
magugulat.
happen?
September, late around mid-September until
Mhm.
January. So, medyo panic kasi I have to prepare for the US and then I have shows. So, parang, my God. So, I don't know. Good luck to me.
Yeah, good luck to that. We're looking
Yeah.
forward to see that. And Architect Harvey, you have a
Last
question?
question. I think for both Mick and Isola, um, how does architecture factor in your visual art? Does it have is it an advantage for you guys in this term of extension? Like for example, architecture is process based. We'll have to sketch first from ideas to paper, and then how it translates. Is this does this work process also translates easier in visual arts, or it's a totally different practice?
Mm, it's it's certainly an advantage for me, I think, for both of us. I
Yeah.
mean, to to be honest with you, I might not even have an art career, like if I wasn't an architect. Or like who knows? Like we don't know that timeline, right? Um so yeah, it's like very much connected for me. Like because like as Ola said, like we work in 3 dimension. The space that I'm showing in is super important. It's like the first thing I do is like look at that space, um, and even the medium itself is just to simplify things. I always say like that I work in photography and sculpture, but it really is architecture. I think even though they're not dwellings or whatnot, but
Yeah.
um, I mean, there's the it's 3 dimension, but there's also the fourth dimension of the person there, which I think is really like using architecture language. Um, so yeah, it's like to me like super connected. I guess the only difference is that because it's not commercial architecture or like it doesn't really function that way, like as a building, there's a big difference there. But in terms of working on it and you know thinking of ideas and like using your principles, it's like super related to me. It's really the lines are really blurred, I think.
Right.
All
I
right.
think
So
I have the same experience. I mean, I'm still using the architectural process of concept making and then exploration of forms and even in art. And it helps a lot to know, technical skills in architecture in getting grants. I just discovered this because whenever me and the curators sort of propose projects abroad, they usually ask for the technical drawings. So because my work is I'm doing an installation which is kind of big, so it kind of helps me because my instead of like being just I guess an artist who doesn't know how to create technical detailing, so my mind looks more professional even though it's made by me as an artist also. So parang it's kind of yeah, if you're an architect and an artist as well, it's a very advantageous position, to be honest. And yeah, yeah, that and yeah, it's the same. Like when you think of the exhibitions, you don't just think of your works. You also think of the how your works are in relation to the space. So it becomes more engaging and more sort of holistic. It's not just you're painting in a space. It's engaging with the space itself. So I think it's an interesting exploration. And yeah, the lines are getting blurred. Like even in I think the winner of what's this award in the UK, they were architects, forensic architects. It's an award for artists, but they gave it to architects. I think it
Right.
happened. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it
Yeah,
happened twice already in the
it was
UK.
what
What's
is
that?
that? Yeah, I know what you're talking.
Turner
Turner
Prize.
Prize.
Turner
Yeah,
Yeah,
Prize, yeah.
the Turner Prize actually went to these young architects, a collective of young architects,
yeah.
and
And then I think their practice is social. They revived a sort of dying neighborhood in Manchester. So they renovated the
amazing.
space, and then they house like activities for the community and they sort of revive. It's very socially aware work. So pwede pala yun. Art
I know,
pwede pala siya.
amazing, right? It was
Yeah,
so yeah. That came out like a few years ago.
yeah,
I really thought na parang wow, like people like Isola and me are like I think we're super lucky in terms of timing.
Yeah.
with being in the art world. Like if, let's say, I had a chance to exhibit in the mid 2000s or something, and there wasn't yet this big interest in architectural work, I don't think it would have even been a possibility. I don't know.
Yeah.
It could have been, who knows? But I really think it was like very, very connected to the architecture work, or even like the chances that I got. Na parang, oh, she does this kind of architecture work, and so maybe we could include her in this group show. And it's actually how I got my beginnings in it. So
This is actually what I was telling about in terms of
yeah,
the intersections, like what you were saying, Turner awarded architects this last 2 years, and then just I think last month, Pulitzer Award was awarded to an architect who exposed yung mga Chinese concentration camps. So that
Oh,
Pulitzer is usually a journalism award, and it was awarded to an architect that does investigative journalism using architectural medium. So this kind of intersections, I hope it's not yet felt here, but I hope moving forward we will be able to see a lot more intersecting practices and inclusive, emphatic designs, di ba? Because inclusivity also breeds emphatic design, because you are bringing in multiple voices, you are accepting multiple points of views, and we are hoping that this trend continues on even after post-pandemic environment. So we actually over our time has already been um, uh, we already consumed our time, but we are really happy for the presentation. I think the numbers in the participants will not reflect the impact, hopefully, of this talk, as we will be posting this in our Facebook, in our YouTube channel. I hope that's okay with you in
yeah,
terms of we can share this in our
Mhm.
YouTube platform, so that more students can experience and can really grasp, siguro rewatch some of your words and
Yeah.
act as an inspiration.
thanks for inviting us, and thanks so much to all the students that joined.
All right.
Yeah, thanks for
yeah.
like being interested in this.
Sorry.
Those that have stayed, can you turn on your mic, your video, para we can have a small group picture man lang before we end,
Gonna
and
include
then
my cat.
Pat
Yes.
will do a closing remark, and then those that are available, please turn on your videos para we can have a group photo. Sana mag-spill over yung good vibes natin into our practice in terms of accepting
Right.
different voices, being inclusive, believing in each other. Those are the things that
Mhm.
we hope that we can impart in this webinar.
Okay,
And
so everybody turn on your cameras. Let's just take a photo. Maybe someone can take. Everybody's smiling. Nobody's
sure,
taking the photo.
Dad can do it.
Dad,
So
can you take a picture? Okay, go
okay,
for it.
3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, thank you.
All right.
All
Thank you
right.
to our
Thank
mentor, Miss
you.
Erica and Sir Andro, for joining us. Maraming salamat. And then maraming salamat, of course, sa ating guests. And Patch, a few words before we end.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much to our speakers. Again, me myself, I'm very, I learned a lot from the influences that you guys took from the expressions that you did with the iterations. And guys, we hope you were able to capture the message that our guests are trying to impart to you. And with the diverse gender landscape that we have at present, it has highly influenced, our architectural responses. Let these different expressions help you explore your thoughts and ideas, and let this weave a narrative to tell a story to everyone. So have a great week, Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe. And before I go, of course,
Oo nga,
meron
sorry.
akong ihahabol. But wait, there's more. How could I forget? Of course, we have prepared a certificate to our guest speakers, to Architect Micaela Benedicto and Architect Isola Tong. Here we go. Thank you again for sharing your invaluable knowledge on the webinar Gender and Practice, given this day, July 30, 2021, via Zoom at De La Salle College of St. Benilde School of Design and Arts. Thank you again. That is officially my
welcome.
closing remarks.
I'll be sending it through email na lang.
Where's the
Micaela.
SOA certificate?
Oh,
Oh,
we
because
also
you're a
have,
professor. Is that why?
no, we also have for
we
Isola.
have.
Okay.
And,
Right.
I'll be sending it to you
Okay.
guys separately through email.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so much.
you. Thank you,
Alright, thank you
everyone.
guys. Thank you, Saga.
Bye.
Say
Bye.
goodnight.
Thanks, Saga.
Bye, everyone.